At certain times throughout our lifting careers, we are likely to take a break from our regular training routine. This may be due to holidays, busy work times of the year, or unplanned family events. So if we take a break from lifting due to one of these events, will we lose our hard-earned muscle mass? Will we go backwards in our muscle building journey, or can we retain the entirety of our muscle tissue? Throughout this video, we will try to answer these questions. So the first question is, if we take a break from lifting, will we lose muscle mass? Well, the answer is yes. Unfortunately, we cannot avoid the inevitable muscle loss resulting from stopping training. This is because if we don't provide a stimulus for the muscle, there is no reason for the body to retain the muscle mass that has been built. Without a stimulus, there is no adaptation. We will likely revert back to our natural muscle size that we would otherwise have had if we weren't lifting in the first place. As an extreme example of this, let's look at this study, which explored the effects of complete bed rest on muscle size. This was quite an incredible study where subjects were intentionally bedridden in this position for 8 weeks straight without being allowed to move. Not surprisingly, trainees saw a progressive decrease in quadriceps muscle size across the 8-week intervention. Although this is not entirely applicable to lifters taking a break from resistance training, it does demonstrate a point. When there is no exercise stimulus for the muscle, there is no reason to maintain muscle mass, and therefore muscle loss is seen. Now getting back to a more relevant discussion, how long does it take to see muscle loss in lifters who take a break from resistance training? Well, it seems that muscle atrophy starts basically immediately after stopping training. So a longer time off training would result in more muscle loss, while less time off training would result in less muscle loss. So rather than asking how long does it take to lose muscle, it's more a question of when would the muscle loss be considered significant. For example, this study explored the effects of leg extension training followed by detraining. As we can see, there was a progressive increase in quadriceps size over a 60-day training period and a progressive decrease in quadriceps size after 40 days of detraining. So there is no real exact time frame that muscle loss will occur with. Rather, muscle will slowly atrophy back to baseline levels after training stops. So if we only stop training for 1 or 2 weeks, then this muscle loss will be quite minimal. But if we stop training for multiple months, then muscle loss will be more significant. So should we be afraid of taking a break from training? Will this sacrifice our hard-earned muscle that we have built over multiple years? Well, according to the muscle retraining research, this is hardly an issue. It seems that for trained lifters, muscle loss is only a temporary effect. Lifters can regain this lost muscle very quickly and continue making further gains in a very short period of time. For example, this study explored the effects of muscle regain after time off training. Trainees performed 10 weeks of quad training, followed by 20 weeks of no training, and then another 5 weeks of quad training after their time off. As we can see in the red line, quad size increased initially in the first 10 weeks of training, and then slowly diminished over the 20-week detraining period. However, once training resumed, quad size returned back to peak muscularity, and even greater than peak muscularity within 5 weeks of returning back to training. So what this study tells us is that once we have developed muscle to some extent, it is much easier to regain that muscle mass than it was to build it in the first place. Therefore, even if significant muscle loss occurs, we are likely to be able to regain that muscle back very quickly. Depending on how much time we take off training will determine how long this will take to get back to peak muscularity. But the time frame will be much faster than the time it took to get to that size in the first place. This rapid regain of muscle mass is often known as the concept of muscle memory. The myonuclear domain theory has been proposed as a mechanism which may explain either partially or fully this concept of muscle memory. Without going into too much detail, the myonuclear domain theory suggests that when we grow muscle, each fiber develops more nuclei, which are crucial for synthesizing muscle protein and therefore building muscle mass. So as the muscle becomes bigger, the number of nuclei increases in proportion. However, when muscle loss occurs after training, the muscle fiber shrinks in size, but the number of nuclei remains the same. So even though the muscle is smaller, we have a greater proportion of nuclei relative to the size of the muscle. This may theoretically explain why rapid muscle growth occurs when retraining a muscle after taking time off. This is a potential reason explaining the muscle memory phenomenon. So now we understand that muscle loss will occur if we completely stop training, although it will come back very quickly. However, in some of these cases where we can't perform our regular training routine, we may not have to completely stop training altogether. Maybe we can still get some training in, just not as many sessions as we usually would. So the next question to explore is, how little training do we need to maintain muscle mass? Unfortunately, we don't really have any direct evidence comparing high volume training followed by low volume training on changes in muscle size. However, we do have some research comparing the minimum training dose required to make strength gains, which may be used as a proxy for changes in muscle size. This meta-analysis explored the research looking at how little training we can perform to still make strength gains. It was concluded that a single set of 6 to 12 reps taken close to failure, performed 2 to 3 times per week, was enough to make strength gains in the squat and bench press in trained lifters. So while this isn't a direct measure of muscle growth, it may be useful to determine the minimum training requirements to at least maintain muscle mass. If we use this same logic, we can probably perform 2 to 3 sets for each muscle group per week, training close to failure, and at least maintain most, if not all, of our muscle mass for a short period of time. So if lifters can still get in 1 to 2 low volume training sessions per week, they may not even have to worry about muscle loss at all. So although taking time off will result in a temporary loss in muscle mass, can there actually be some positive effects of taking a break from training? Well, taking a short break probably won't have any major positive or negative effects in the grand scheme of things. However, there are 2 potential benefits I can think of, which may have a small benefit for lifters. Let's now cover what they are. The first potential benefit is the resensitization effect of taking time off training. We don't have enough solid evidence to make this claim conclusively, so it is more of a theoretical concept. It has been suggested that we become chronically accustomed to resistance training. After training consistently for multiple months and years on end, we are less sensitive to the training stimulus. As a result, we would theoretically see a poorer muscle growth response from the same training stimulus. However, if we take a short break from lifting, we may become more resensitized to resistance training and see a faster rate of muscle growth, at least for a short period of time. The best evidence we have on this topic is this study, which compared the effects of consistent versus intermittent bench press training on muscle growth over a 6-month period. One group trained continuously for 6 months straight, while the other group trained for 6 weeks followed by 3 weeks off. As we can see, the intermittent group saw temporary decreases in chest muscle size during their weeks off, but the muscle was rapidly regained very quickly. And as we can see by the end of the 6 months, muscle growth was basically the same between groups. This study brings up a potential benefit of taking time off. While overall muscle growth was similar between groups, we saw a rapid increase in muscle mass after returning from training after a break. So maybe if the trainee just took one short break over a 6-month or a 1-year time period, they may have continued this rapid rate of muscle growth for a longer period of time. This may potentially result in greater long-term muscle growth over a multi-month or multi-year timescale. It should be noted that this is completely speculative, but it is a potential benefit to consider. And the other potential benefit of taking a break from lifting is for a mental break. This is probably not as relevant for hypertrophy training compared with other performance-related training like strength or other sports. However, it is possible that trainees can psychologically benefit from stepping away from the gym, or at least reduce how much time we spend lifting for a short period of time. Although most of us enjoy lifting, it can take away from other aspects of life to some extent. So taking a break can allow you to spend more time and energy on some other aspects of life that may also be important to you. Furthermore, it may reinvigorate your enthusiasm for lifting after being away from it for a short while. This can help with long-term adherence to training, making the training process more sustainable over time. So to summarize this video, let's establish some practical recommendations. If we take time away from training, we cannot avoid the inevitable muscle loss that will occur. Exactly how much muscle loss we see will be dependent on the time length that we stop training for. However, short-term muscle loss isn't really something to worry about because we can regain this muscle very quickly after returning back to normal training. Exactly why we rapidly regain lost muscle is not entirely clear, but it may be explained in part by the myonuclear domain theory. Furthermore, if it is viable, trainees may seek to perform a low volume of training during their time away from your regular lifting routine. Even very low volumes of training may be able to allow lifters to maintain most or all of their current muscle mass. Furthermore, there may also be some potential benefits of taking time away from training, such as resensitizing the muscle to growth and providing a mental break from your regular routine. So ultimately, taking a few days or even a few weeks off training is not a big issue in the grand scheme of things. While your appearance may look slightly worse during this temporary time, it almost certainly won't inhibit long-term gains.